people think usually that we acquire knowledge by opening our eyes and our ears. And let the sensations stream into us. And they believe then that we record this like a camera. In my opinion, if we wish to get knowledge, we have to have a problem. It has to be knowledge of something. We have to find out something. We don't have to wait for information to stream into us, but we have to be inquisitive if we want to get knowledge. If we were passive, we would gain a confused mass of sensations or something like that, which we would hardly be able to understand and to convert into what one may call knowledge. Quite apart from that, perception is not really, in my opinion, the main source of our knowledge. The role of perception is to inform us about a momentary situation in our environment. But we couldn't really interpret our perceptions without knowing much more about our environment. Namely, we know whether we are in a house or whether we are in a glacier. So we have two kinds of knowledge. This wider knowledge of a frame in which we orientate ourselves, and the momentary perception which gives us information about the situation at that particular moment. And it is only this situation in which we can use our perception. So we have theoretical knowledge and, if you like, the momentary practical challenge to our theoretical knowledge. And here comes perception in.
I suspect that some defenders of the traditional conception would say, well, we admit that there's activity, in that we admit that people have to attend, that one can easily fail to register masses of things that are in principle perceivable because of failure of attention. They would admit that in seeking knowledge of the world round us, we engage in more or less exploratory activity or manipulate things. And I think in particular, they'd say, wherever we look around in the world, we're always ready to draw inferences of a certain kind from what we see, using our background knowledge. And so they would argue, perhaps, that they don't see that you're really correcting them by saying that the mind is active in the pursuit of knowledge.
You mentioned that traditionally it is said that with the activity comes in because we draw inferences from our perceptions, let us say. But it is also at once said, yes, but with that there is the danger of error. So if you admit activity, you do admit our human erroneous moves. You admit human fallibility to come in. It was for this reason, I think, that the traditional theory stressed the passivity, that is to say, the datum. It spoke about sense data, data means given. So we are given certain things, and that is not active, but there we are passive. We are given certain things, and as this given knowledge, this is to be taken as really certain, rock bottom. On this we can build. If we replace the given by our active intervention from the very beginning, our trying to solve problems from the very beginning, not passively waiting for what we are given, then the uncertainty comes in, even according to the traditional view of knowledge.
The interesting question that seems to me to arise here is, why has it been thought that we can attain certainty, and in some sense should, that we aren't doing our bit, intellectually speaking, unless we've acquired it? And I think one reason is perhaps emotional. I don't know if you'd agree with this, that people find doubt an uncomfortable state of mind. It's like sitting on a twisted cushion that you need to straighten out to be comfortable, or like passing your desk and seeing an unanswered letter or an unpaid bill. A belief that's to some extent been rendered acceptable by your investigations, but has not been rendered certain, is a piece of uncompleted business, in that it's susceptible of further improvement.
In my logic of scientific discovery, I suggested that instead of building on rock bottom an edifice of knowledge, which then will be absolutely certain, what we have to do is to drive piles in a swamp sufficiently deep to carry the building, at least for some time, the building which we erect. This kind of metaphor also indicates that we drive down from above. That is to say, we have our theoretical knowledge. This theoretical knowledge has to have a certain priority. We come from up down. The black man who looks for a black hat in a dark room, and the black hat may not be there, he at least knows something, at least knows his problem of finding the black hat. That is the minimum he has to know, and this is theoretical knowledge which is prior to the empirical knowledge, the feeling of the hat for which he is seeking. The main instigation for the search of truth is really that we see new problems. The discovery of new problems can be more important than the solution of the problem. I think this is perhaps the most important thing in science, and is the result of an attitude which does not go for certainty, but goes for where we fail, for the uncertainty. There are the problems where we do not find satisfaction, certainty. There we should go on digging.
All right, so you abandon certainty as an object because, in effect, it's a block. It's the idea that you can achieve certainty obstructs what the mind ought to be doing, pursuing ever deeper into the knowabilities of the world, but without any assumption that it'll ever finally conclude its search. fine. But it's all very well to say the alternative is the search for truth, but to know that we're doing this more or less right, that we're pushing in the right direction in this search, don't we have to have some alternative to certainty, something in the nature of truth-likeness, probability, confirmation, support, justification, all ideas about which you've been very critical? Don't we need something like that to show us that we're pointed in the right direction?
We have to replace it by the search for truth in the form of criticism. We have constantly to criticize our own theories, our own interpretations. And criticism of this kind, which I have in mind, could be called rational criticism because it is criticism of our own theories in the interest of truth. It must be unpersonal, completely impersonal criticism. It is criticism which asks itself, have we not made a mistake? Have we not overlooked something? Can we not find fault in what we have thought, interpreted, constructed, or whatever? It is criticism, as it were, from inside, in the sense that it is a criticism directed to improving our knowledge. The knowledge which we have may be faulty and therefore should be improved through criticism. One can compare this to the following. The search for certainty is like erecting a wall round your castle and build the wall higher and higher and higher. It will never be quite high enough to establish certainty. So we have to buy a watchdog. Then we don't need such a high wall, and the watchdog looks from inside. That is this internal criticism which I have in mind. Once we realize that our theories cannot be certain, nothing helps but self-criticism in this impersonal sense. It is the only thing by which we can improve our theories, get them nearer to the truth.
The trouble with self-criticism of the Crusoian kind, if I may put it like that, rather than the kind which is undertaken at the behest of the political police, is that it's like trying to tickle yourself. It just doesn't work. Or perhaps even trying to hit yourself over the head with a hammer. It doesn't work very well. And an invincible affection prevents one putting any real force behind the blow. In other words, in general, intellectual, genuinely intellectual self-criticism often fails because the critic and the criticized are one and the same. Well, an implication of that, of course, that science can't be an activity conducted by a Robinson Crusoe without effective criticism, is that science is a social institution. And in your later writings, you develop this a good deal into the idea of the theory of objective knowledge, that as well as the knowledge that's in some sense or other contained in the brains or minds of individual knowers, there is common knowledge which to some extent contains or overlaps that individual knowledge, but to a considerable extent goes beyond it.
Now, what I want to illustrate is the distinction between two kinds of knowledge. The knowledge, let us say, I know, and the knowledge, it is known. This I know is knowledge in the subjective sense, and it is known is knowledge in the objective sense. I want to stress that the basic knowledge is, of course, subjective knowledge, knowledge which is known to people. I will, however, show how far you can build beyond this basic knowledge and how incredibly important knowledge in the objective sense has become, especially since the invention of language, of writing, of printing, and everything which follows up to this. Logarithms, books of logarithms. These can be computed, and a computer can be made to print out a book of logarithms. Of course, somebody has to have the subjective knowledge needed for instructing the computer who will compose these logarithms. But the actual logarithms will be known only by the people who use them. And it is unlikely that they will be ever used more than a minute fraction of what is in a full book of logarithm, let us say, up to 7 decimals. It would be a library needed for keeping them. So there will be objective knowledge not used, not known to anybody. Now, theories are important for our lives in a sense in which it is rarely realized. Think of all that which is involved in a flight from, let us say, London to Edinburgh. No single person can have the knowledge in his head which actually enters here into this question of safety. And it is a lot of knowledge, of subjective knowledge, which is here related. But the subjective knowledge is insufficient. None of the subjective knowledges in the various people's head suffices. And something is there which nobody has in his head, namely the way in which all this is interlinked. This is built up by an organization, and this organization is objective and impersonal, although it has been developed during many years by mainly the correction of mistakes which we have made. Now, in this sense, the realm of objective knowledge is great, very important. The best example still is libraries. And the interesting thing is that the philosophers who have dealt with the theory of knowledge have overlooked this. They all thought of knowledge in the certain primary subjective sense in which people are there and act on the basis of what they remember, what they know. Hardly anybody has seen that the product of our thinking, which are very largely expectations, theories, especially theories, that the product of our thinking is really a kind of knowledge which just as well has the right to be called knowledge and is called by us always knowledge. We speak of scientific knowledge, meaning, of course, objective knowledge, so that the product of our thinking becomes impersonal.
There's a remark of Burke's which comes to mind here, something like, the individual is foolish, but the species is wise. That perhaps doesn't want to be taken too literally, since if the species is to become wise, it becomes wise through the intellectual enterprise of particular individuals within it. But it seems to me a moral is that the individual can only make intellectual progress by utilizing the accumulated tradition of knowledge and procedures for acquiring knowledge, which constitute the system of objective knowledge. But there's one particular thing you go on to say about objective knowledge, where you say it's best understood in an evolutionary perspective, that it's something that's evolved in a more or less Darwinian way by selective preservation of some favorable elements and the competitive exclusion of undesirable elements. Now, what actually do you see as the significance of this comparison? Or perhaps it's more than a comparison. Perhaps it's a theory itself.
Yes, there is indeed a theory. It is called evolutionary theory of knowledge, which plays now a considerable role in biology, namely in evolutionary biology, especially since the last great developments in genetics. And this theory is really an application of the trial and error theory, the theory of that we learn by trial and error elimination. We learn from our mistakes. One can say that from the amoeba to Einstein, there is only one step. Both learn by trial and error and the elimination of error. The main difference is that Einstein is intensely self-critical, which the amoeba is not. Einstein develops his theories and throws them into the waste paper basket many times before he comes to the theory which he would perhaps publish. The new way of looking at these things is really that life from the beginning is problem solving by this method of trial and error elimination. And this holds both for the individual organism and for the species and the evolution of the species.